Hello and welcome everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you here, those of you who are here in person and those of you who are joining us online. My name is Thorsten Reimer. I'm the Dean of the University Library, and it's my pleasure to say a few words of welcome and maybe to sort of situate the discussion that we're going to see and say a little bit also about why we are hosting it here at the library, and maybe briefly share a little bit of my personal perspective on this topic. So this is now actually, I think, the fourth event that we've sort of co-hosted or run here at the library in the past few weeks that touched on AI. And you could say that's maybe a reflection on this just being a very popular topic, but I would argue it goes right to the heart of what a library is about and more broadly also what a university is about. And I think in the essence you can say a library is about access to information, preferably for everyone in an as unbiased way as possible, to allow everyone to use that information to create new knowledge, to enhance their learning, and to just do fun and interesting and exciting things with. And it's, I think, therefore a clear supporter of what universities do and the role that we all have in society, because I would argue access to information and the ability to understand something, to debate it, to learn, and then maybe to change some things in society or to decide what's worth preserving are absolutely essential for what I would consider a sort of healthy, open and democratic society. And that's always relied on tools and different ways of accessing information, but we're now, I think, seeing a not insignificant shift, and one that both excites me, but probably I would say in some ways more concerns me, and that is that the way how we access information, how we perceive the world, is now increasingly controlled, or at least mediated, through software tools, both commercial and non-commercial, that we use every morning to identify what in the news we might want to read, or the social media platforms that we use to decide what they're going to show us. It also goes to the heart of how universities operate, because universities also operate on data, and increasingly we rely on, say, the systems that the library buys to help you identify something that you research, or systems that the university buys that it uses to decide what to invest in or how to develop a research strategy. So there are many, many things that we as in society use that influence our decision making, and increasingly vendors of all of these systems build AI technology into it. And I think that's exciting, it has great potential, but it's also something that really urgently needs critique, because I don't know about you, but I cannot with utmost confidence say that I or my staff understand all of the tools that we currently have available in the market. And if we don't understand the tools that we are using, then I think we build bias in at the very basic point on how we interact with information, how our opinion is shaped, and how our decisions are made. I mean, you can say, if you maybe don't see something in a library catalog, that's perhaps a secondary concern. But if you are a judge that uses tools that advise you on sentencing rules, and these tools use AI technology that's based on biased information, then you will get biased information coming out of it. Or if you're a university that decides where to invest in research, and these tools are biased, then you will shift the whole research agenda and also societal impact. I think these are all topics that really urgently need discussing, because we need to understand how to use and how to deploy these tools. And that's why I'm really happy that we can host this discussion today. And I'll leave you with a perhaps slightly depressing anecdote. A few years ago, when I worked at the British Library in London, we used to run a series of events on data, and one of those was on artificial intelligence. We had a great panel, and most of the questions from the audience were, well, this is all really interesting, what you say about information, but when is AI going to become sentient and going to kill us all? And how can we stop this? And there was a bit of debate back and forth, and I all the time felt, well, as a sci-fi fan, that's great, but we are really missing some urgent topics. And then a member of the panel raised their hand and said, I'm not sure I can answer that question, but what I'm really concerned about is you all every day give a lot of your data and your time to some big global companies, and they use that data to train really effective AI, and the AI will, in the first instance, sell you products that you don't need, make you poorer, and maybe sell you product that will harm this planet. It will then start to misinform you and make you really angry about politics and help to sort of the social contract breaking down. Once it's achieved that, it's then going to make you redundant and poor. And he said, and once the AI has done all of these things, do I really care that it's going to kill me 40 years later? I don't know. Maybe we fix the other issues first, and if we fix them well, then maybe that same AI is not going to kill us 40 years later. So I don't know if we'll have an answer to that particular question, but I'm really looking forward to a discussion about the challenges of AI and what we as a society should or maybe shouldn't do to make this a useful tool and not one that's creating more bias and misinforming us, and instead make it one that makes society richer and more open and more transparent and more equal. So thank you very much for letting me have this introduction. So I'm now briefly handing over to Remarco, who will introduce the panel.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Remarco Bhattacharya, and I'm a third-year computer science and economics major. And I'm also a member of the IOP Tech Team Board, as well as the president and chair of UC Open Data, an on-campus organization dedicated to transforming data into a form that is more publicly accessible and available. Today's speakers series, final event of the academic year, AI, Technology, Culture, Politics, and Policy Collide, features 4 incredible speakers: Joan Donovan, Elizabeth Adams, Chenhao Tan, and Ian Bogost. Joan Donovan is the research director of the Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy. Dr. Donovan leads the field in examining interest and technology studies, online extremism, media manipulation, and disinformation campaigns. She is the co-author of Meme Wars, the untold story of online battles upending democracy in America. Dr. Donovan leads the technology and social change project, TASK. TASK explores how media manipulation is a means to control public conversation, derail democracy, and disrupt society. Elizabeth Adams was a non-resident fellow at the Digital Civil Society Lab in partnership with the Center for Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity. She's a technology integrator working at the intersection of cybersecurity, AI ethics, and AI governance, focused on ethical tech design. She also passionately teaches, advises, consults, speaks, and writes on critical subjects within diversity and inclusion in artificial intelligence, such as racial bias and facial recognition technology, video surveillance, predictive analytics, and children's rights. Chenhao Tan is an assistant professor at the Department of Computer Science and Data Science at the University of Chicago. He is also affiliated with the Harris School of Public Policy. He directs the Chicago Human Plus AI Lab, CHI, and his interests include human-centered machine learning, language, and social dynamics, as well as multi-community engagement. Dr. Ian Bogost is an author and an award-winning game designer. He is a Barbara and David Thomas Distinguished Professor in Arts and Sciences, Director of Film and Media Studies, and Professor of Computer Science and Engineering at Washington University in St. Louis. Dr. Bogost is also a founding partner at Persuasive Games LLC, an independent game studio, and a contributing editor at The Atlantic. As a reminder, please silence your cell phones. After tonight's moderated discussion ends, please line up at the microphone that will be placed in the audience. The first 3 questions will go to students. Finally, the IOP is looking for student feedback. Head to our website, politics.uchicago.edu, to fill out the IOP student survey and tell us how we can improve for next year. By taking the survey, you'll be entered into a raffle to win a $100 gift card. The survey is for current UChicago students only. And with that, please welcome tonight's distinguished panel, Joan Donovan, Elizabeth Adams, Chenhao Tan, and Ian Bogost.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Is this thing on? You can hear me? So you probably walked in and thought, who is playing hip hop in the library? Right? So some of you are sitting here. Nothing wrong with that, exactly. But the song you were listening to, which you may not know, is a song conjured by AI to imitate Drake and The Weeknd, who have never had a collaboration together, but would sound pretty cool doing it. And nevertheless, what this model was fed was the catalog of Drake and the catalog of The Weeknd, and then through prediction and a bunch of math, which we're not gonna make anybody do. I know I'm from Boston, but this ain't Good Will Hunting, okay? Come on, a few of you seen that movie? It was a good job, right? But, you know, one of the things that I wanted to do was to expose you to the way in which AI might start to appear in our lives as everyday artifacts, things that we think are quote unquote real, that are generated by technology. And in the case of art and culture, technology that utilizes and remixes, sometimes pays homage to other artists, right? Paintings that are derivatives of other paintings, but then they stand on their own. But with this kind of AI, it's made to almost look like the identical fake, in a sense. It is counterfeit on delivery. And we had a little joke back there, me and Ian, about, I said, it's not even a real song. And he says, well, it is a real song, but not the way that you would think of a song being written, right? And so I think it's important that we start to unpack and understand how these artifacts are going to show up, probably first as farce and then later as tragedy. How many of you saw the AI-generated photos that made it look like Trump had been struggling with the police and running from them? Or you'd see the Pope all dressed up like he was going out for a Friday night, right? Pope going clubbing, right? And these things are experimental in some respects, but in other aspects of our social institutions, like law, for instance, we don't really know who owns the copyright, for instance, on an AI-generated song that uses the likeness and the intonation and the imitated vocal cords of other artists, or AI that is taking a bunch of different images, and when you just input that you want to see a cat eating pizza in space, it will pull together all of its references for cats, pizza, and space, and then bring them all together. Now, if you were to use some of this AI, for instance, to just switch up, and say, well, actually, I want to see a cat eating French fries with ketchup, then it gets kind of strange, because the ketchup bottle starts to look like ketchup bottles you'd see at the grocery store, some more recognizable than others. And then what you start to realize when you look at AI and you understand that a lot of the AI references are products themselves, and they start to cross between products that you'd see on the everyday, in your grocery store, or laptops tend to, for some reason, not look futuristic, but they tend to look like MacBooks, for instance. When you ask the technology to produce these everyday items, it does tend to, instead of bring us into a place of broad creativity, a place of almost nostalgia in some way. We feel like we've seen some of these images before. And in some cases, it's because the referent is also something that's already been copyrighted and maybe is already famous. And in the case of large language models, some AI researchers have gone as far as to call large language models plagiarism machines. Because what they do is they take massive amounts of text, usually the entire corpus of Wikipedia, the entire corpus of Reddit, and they use that to predict what the next word might be. So you ask it a question or a prompt, and then using all of these, all of the data within the language model, it will create sentences, but they're eerily reminiscent of sentences that have been written before. Not exactly plagiarism in the sense that you went out and copied something, but plagiarism in the sense that it takes things that are already written and reproduces them and reorders them in predictable and typical ways. That being said, ChatGPT writes me a really great bio. I sound awesome. I wasn't, labeled as having committed any heinous crimes. It didn't name any of the awards that I've won, which was kind of a shame, because usually you want to put that in a bio. Like, here I didn't update my bio, and I'm actually an IOP fellow. Would you believe that? I let someone from down east up here, you know? Which is all to say that it does have some legitimate use cases, but what's in the model is something that we don't really know. And today, did anybody get a chance to watch the hearing at the Senate about AI? Well, if you didn't get to it, let me catch you up. Which is essentially that people who are building AI are afraid of what they're building, but like the X-Men, they don't know if they can control its power. So they're asking government in some ways to have oversight over the field, which is somewhat unprecedented, but also kind of weird because you're like, just take a day off then, right? Maybe just shut it down and put it on pause if you know not what it does. Right? And we're starting to hear the old Cold War arms race language coming back. Well, we don't know what other countries are going to do with it, so we need to be ahead. But what was interesting about the hearing at the beginning is Senator Blumenthal demonstrated the power of AI. So they took a small model, generative, pre-trained transformer, a GPT. And they took all of his House floor speeches and other things that he had written, and they put it into this model and then asked it the question, if you were opening a hearing on AI, what would Senator Blumenthal's comments be? And then they used another set of AI that was trained on his voice to read that transcript out loud. And all he did was press play. And that was read aloud into the government record. And he even saw it as a pretty close facsimile of what he might have produced, given his prior criticisms of tech. And it became a subject of debate online because, you know, in the weirdest of instances, it proves that government could probably be easily, you know, swapped out, this one for that one, right? Maybe we don't need Senator Blumenthal if, you know, the entirety of what he says is that redundant. Not saying that, though. It's the house of nonpartisanness here. But I think it's important that we understand the consequences of this when we talk about AI rooting out some kinds of jobs. That also gets rid of things that come with being a person in government or come with being a person in institutions, which is the human knowledge of how systems work, how systems are implemented. And so when we talk about, you know, the Terminator coming out and murdering everyone, it's not going to be like that. It might be like you're starved to death because there's no work for you if all your work is somehow made redundant by the AI. But nevertheless, I have some questions for our panel today to think about, well, what does it mean to do this kind of work and what kind of guardrails should we be thinking about, and how does the work that we do together help us better understand the potential for this technology? And then maybe we'll close out with some light breathing and maybe some yoga, I don't know, and as a way to relax a bit. So take a deep breath. And Elizabeth, I'm going to start with you. And I'd love to hear about your work in the field of responsible AI. And what does that mean?
Sure. So currently I'm a doctoral student, and my research focuses on leadership of responsible AI. So I'm studying leadership behaviors, experiences, and decisions around responsible AI, and more specifically, how do you engage employees who come from groups that have been traditionally harmed by AI? What is their participation like in the AI life cycle from the very beginning to implementation, as well as to monitoring? And then how do we make that connection between those employees being members of society? Because when we talk about society and AI impacts, we tend to think about that as like others, people out there. But they're actually people that get up and go to work every day, and they want to contribute to their organization, want to help them meet their mission and so forth. But they've often been left out of the AI life cycle. They've been left out. Their voice has not been elevated, and they have not had a stake in responsible AI or AI. And responsible AI just kind of brings all that together, the tenets of being ethical, making sure your AI is explainable, transparent, auditable, a number of different things. And so how do we bring more and diverse voices into that perspective? I got there from working 3 years in the city of Minneapolis on a civic tech initiative where community and policymakers were working together on deciding public oversight over surveillance technology, AI-enabled surveillance technology. And I became concerned with what I saw in community with their trade-off of, instead of going to shop with their family or vacations, they were spending their time at City Hall advocating for what should be safe technology. So I wanted to go back into the corporate spaces and work with leaders and influencers and board of directors on how do we ensure, as I mentioned before, that we have these very important voices in the participation of responsible AI.
Love that. I love to hear it. Chenhao, I want to talk to you a bit about your research and where this field started, and how your work is, especially your work training some of these transformer algorithms, or I shouldn't say algorithms, but software. How is your work and your research implicated in this moment? And what kind of decisions are you having to make about what you do and what you don't do, and what are the ethical trade-offs of making those decisions?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, these are very good questions. I guess I just give a little background of my work and my lab, and then come back to the ethical relations. So my lab is called Chicago Human Plus AI Lab, where our main goal is to think about what's the best way to use AI to empower humans, what's the best way to use AI to augment humans. And I guess I've been working on this topic for, I guess, at least before the recent wave of GPTs, and I think there are a lot of questions one can think about even before the GPT era, but the GPT certainly makes a lot of what I work much more important. Now we think about the potential impact of large language models, or if you have interacted with GPT, at least 3.5, you can kind of see how impressive these models have become. Maybe getting into the history of this a little bit, right? GPT is an instance of a language model where the goal is to, given a sequence or given a sequence of words, and try to predict what the next word is. And what we have learned is that if we make the model really big and have very big training data, then this model can be very powerful. With some additional tricks that I won't go into detail, these models are now perceived as sparks of early artificial general intelligence. I think on the one hand, I think, like, in addition to a lot of these ethical issues, there are also very exciting opportunities that these models can potentially service, right? One, it can potentially help us actually study a lot of problems much more efficiently. I guess one recent tech talk was on this issue of like how we can provide personalized education for every student, and I think these are indeed what these models can potentially do very well. Maybe they can teach kids how to write much more effectively by providing personalized feedback. But at the same time, I think going back to what Joanne was saying earlier about the kind of regulation that Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, was talking about today, I do think one piece that maybe, I just mentioned that piece, and I'm happy to dive into more topics on this topic, is kind of the openness of these models. Like OpenAI, ironically, has moved towards less open in the process of developing more and more powerful GPTs. And in many ways, I guess, it's justified. I guess the rationale would be these models are so powerful. If they unleash it, it will create chaos for everyone in the world. But on the other hand, I guess, like, at least in my world, many researchers in this space would think that actually kind of one reason that he was pushing for regulation is that prevents competitiveness and creates advantage for his own company, because it's harder for competitors to be able to create similar models. And I think it's useful. And as a matter of fact, we don't really know what training data goes into GPT-4. And they kind of became more and more conservative in terms of what technical details they share in their recent updates. And I think that's something is useful, at least maybe from the regulatory perspective, to think about collectively what we should know about these models, and what is shareable, and maybe there can be some auditory guidelines that some auditors can be able to know more details than we do as, I guess, general public. But on the good news is that recently I think there are more third-party, like more open models. For instance, Meta released not as big as GPT-4 model, but useful enough for a lot of researchers to achieve quite impressive results that we were not able to achieve like maybe a month ago. And I think in general, this is an area with a lot of interesting developments, and it would be great if the public knows more about it and collectively make decisions along the line of what Elizabeth was talking about, trying to participate in this process so that we can actually create a responsible AI for, I guess, the entire community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting to hear you talk about the way in which industry might want to have a pause, in the sense that if you already have the data, you can continue to work within your own corporation, but it stalls any other innovation from obtaining the massive amount of data that they would need in order to create their own products. And Ian, I want to go to you about this, because oftentimes before things become, at the scale that they're imperiling society, they're used for fun, right? And so in your world, where you think deeply about the way in which technology and culture interact and the way in which people use technology and play, what were some of the aspirational or exciting moments in the history of AI, in particular in these creative industries, that you thought could be promising? And then if you bring us downhill on the roller coaster real fast after that, as to where calamity struck.
Right. One of the things that we know about computing in particular is that we tend to use it for useless things before we use it for useful things. We kind of don't know what these things are for. And some of the earliest examples of computer games, which seem trivial, you don't need them, they're not necessary, were just because folks had access to technologies and they had time. So when you get Space War out of MIT in the late 60s, it's just because there were some folks that had access to mini computers, to DEC mini computers, and some time to mess around with those. And then others at research labs around the nation also were looking for something to do with their time, and those got shared. And the same was true of adventure, the sort of cave crawling text game, and then we see the same thing with computer graphics, with lots of technologies that are sort of, you mess around with them before they turn into something universal and hopefully useful for more than just pleasure. Not that there's anything wrong with that. And so the ingenious thing, so ChatGPT is about 6 months old, right? Mm-hmm. But these kinds of models, the GPT models, and LLMs and the approach to neural networks, which were considered a dead end not too long ago, that's been going on for some time. But we weren't talking about it, not really, not at this scale, and not with the diversity of people who are now engaged in the conversation. Congress was not having hearings about the matter. And then suddenly in November, we all got access to this chatbot that OpenAI released. And whatever you thought about it, there are a couple things that were important. One was that you could use it. You could get in there and talk to it, chat with it, ask it things, and it would give you results. So if you say, like, write me a Drake song about donuts, it would do that for you, right? And that's the playful part. Mm-hmm. Like, just messing around with it. What can this thing even do? What are its capacities? Seeding that out into the world. And it coming from OpenAI, which was at that time an underdog in this race, it was a very smart, I'll call it a marketing move, okay? And so that's very relevant to the conversations that we saw today and everything that's happened in between. When Altman says, regulate me, he's also saying, I have power. And asking, well, you figure it out, right? You mess around. Well, you're the legislators, or you're in control as the executives of the regulating agencies. Figure out how this should work, so that I can go back home and continue building and developing that power. But also, we know something about what that power is now. We believe in it. We've seen it. We've messed around with it. I just published a piece today in The Atlantic about AI and cheating at the end of this sort of first term and it's just much weirder and messier than I expected. And I think about this stuff for a living. It's not like write my term paper. It's much more convoluted and complex. So we've already reached the point where folks are playing with this, and it's therefore far more deeply hooked into our understanding of what the future might look like than we even realize.
Yeah. No, I mean, the good old days of cheating on exams, right? So far behind us when ChatGPT can spit out a term paper. And one of the things that I want to think about, though, is, it wasn't that long ago that we had interest in our society about disinformation and the use of social media to broadcast lies at scale. And this was something that seemed to take over, almost like a tidal wave. And there was broad calls for regulation of social media, and nothing happened, right? Is this a similar moment? Elizabeth, I want to ask you, what kind of groups, civil society groups, other folks need to get engaged to have that kind of accountability where government has the wherewithal or the political will to stand up? Or is this the case where civil society is going to have to build auditing tools and do a lot of that safety on their own?
I think that is an absolutely incredible question, because it ultimately, for me, lends itself to who's ultimately responsible for this. Should I, as a member of society, again, trade off time with my family and friends to communicate to policymakers why this is a harm, or why some of these technologies are a harm? And in my work with the city of Minneapolis, policymakers have a lot of things to think about. They're not technologists. So they're constantly being educated, and as they're being educated about the current technology, something else is coming. So, and then you have leaders in organizations who clearly have insight and influence into what the technology is doing, but to the conversations we've been having, they have not done a really good job of self-regulating, right? So you have all of these stakeholders who are a part of the process, but for whatever reason, we cannot get together and figure this thing out. And so what tends to happen is it tends to be the people who are not in the influential positions, right, who are bearing the brunt of it. And you mentioned before, this could possibly mean that someone could starve to death. So how do I, as a person, I love technology, but I also want safe technology. Like, I'm just tapped out. I'm everywhere. I'm burnt out in responsible AI. So I can only imagine, and I try to keep myself educated. I try to invest in this so that I'm always present and able to speak about what are some of the challenges and some of the opportunities. So I can't imagine what it would be like for one particular group to feel like they have to own it. People who are mostly harmed, or even those who are leaders in an organization. We all need to do this, and that's part of my research, which is stakeholder participation in responsible AI. What does that look like? What does the participation look like? Is it nominal? Is it influential? What are the degrees? Are people who are trainers, do we consider them just as important as data scientists? And so I don't know where we go other than that everyone needs to continue to educate themselves and speak up and become a part of the process. And that's what it was like for me back in 2017. I've been a technologist for many years, but I saw what was happening in the AI space. And I followed my curiosity, and I just started having learning events. And then that led to this. It led to United Nations appointment and all kinds of different things. So I think all of us have to play a part in creating this life where we are thriving with technology.
Let me think about then AI and education, Chenhao, because you brought this up as an example. One of the things that I worry about when it comes to education is we already don't have enough teachers for the amount of brave minds that enter into our public school system. And when I think about automated plus individualized technologies, I think a lot about how easy it would be to leave someone or groups of people behind that don't have the proper access to technology, or this is just not the way in which they learn, and that teachers now are already struggling with so much technology in the classroom. You know, you've got 30 students with 30 iPads and 5 of them are broken, and you know, one kid has figured out how to log in and you know, play Candy Crush, or I just pick one at random, not that I've been addicted. But you know, AI in education also implies an immense amount of resources that people would already have access to, and in some ways seems to invert the public interest and supplant corporate interest at the helm of where we need to go in terms of education. And I ask this as someone who is child-free, not childless, okay? I don't really care about children. No, I'm just kidding. I love kids. They're just full of snot. So, but I ask this as someone who really had to deeply understand what children were going through during the pandemic, and watching my friends struggle with technology just so that they could get their child educated. And so what is, you know, in your mind, what is coming to the front of view for you as you think about AI and education and personalized learning?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I think a lot of the questions will be kind of, you see similar answers here. We don't really know the real answer, right? I think these are so new that we don't know how deep the impact it will have. But I think, at least as a tool, it seems that it's very sophisticated. Like, for instance, you can easily adjust like what reading level that this writing is on. It can potentially elevate some burden or take some burden away from the teachers if used appropriately. And that's kind of a lot of what my research is about. I guess, like, we don't really know how to use them appropriately, and it's unclear what's the best way to use it to make teachers feel empowered. And I think all your concerns are valid, and I think the technology gap will likely bring non-trivial harm to kids that do not have the technology or do not have the background from the family or from financially or from like educationally. But at the same time, I guess, I think it's also useful to think of like the reverse side of that, like there's huge inequality in terms of the educational resources that kids can get, or in terms of quality of teachers. And one possible way that these tools can help is also kind of, if they are accessible to each kid, then maybe they can level the field a little bit by giving personalized feedback to kids. I honestly don't know how it will play out and whether it will actually make education better for everyone. But as you said, I think we are already in a crisis, and it's very hard to figure out a solution. I think it provides a new tool in the.
Yeah, Ian,
Can I jump in here? Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Okay, you know when you go to like the grocery store or the Target now, and you go to buy your stuff, you get everything you want, you put it in your cart, and then you go and there's a self-checkout, right? And at the self-checkout, there's someone standing there who's like making sure it doesn't go awry. You know, and you start to check, you know, oh, it's like, no, it didn't, the bag, it doesn't know it's in the bag, or you buying a, you know, something controlled, can of spray paint, or God knows what, and they have to come check, you know, bottle of booze, and they come check your ID. So that sort of thing, that kind of really, you know, grotesquely bad new labor We see that all the time when new technologies arrive. The quality of the work is reduced. The convenience and the efficiency, is it increased? Well, certainly there may be fewer workers that the store has to pay to do that work. The quality of their experience as laborers is certainly lower. The quality of your experience as a customer might also be, or at least it's changed, and then eventually you forget that it ever could have been different. And we're already starting to see that pattern repeat with AI in the same way that we've seen it repeat with everything. Like as an educator, you know how much time I spent, forget about AI, just wrestling with like Canvas, course management, garbageware, where you're like, oh, I've got to set it up this way. And then, then your university debates, well, should we have a policy about how we only spend a bunch of time doing that? So we will change this idea that we'll get like better or more personalized, higher quality, more efficient outputs. We've heard that forever. And what we tend to get is just like weirdly more obfuscated practices where you're doing different kind of work. It's usually lower quality work. The outputs are maybe better, maybe worse, certainly different. And I just don't see any reason to believe that would change with AI. Although, if I had to play devil's advocate with myself, it's that yes, we are finally starting to see some signs of life in the whole personal tutoring space, which, by the way, the computer science profession has been promising for decades and really has made almost no progress on. So, the track record isn't great. But it's going to be extremely messy. It's just going to be grotesquely messy. Even if at the end of it, we come up with something that's equitable and that feels good to use and, all of that stuff, which is also very unlikely. Right?
Yeah. Well, I think also part of it is about removing the human in the loop that causes also unpredictable outcomes, right? A part of this is about building a society of control where you can, you believe that, the mechanical input has a predictable output. And what's great about humans is how totally irrational we behave in all different kinds of situations, from love to our creativity to our intelligence to what we do in moments of crisis. And technology is supposed to smooth those transactions. Part of what technology does is, Bruno Latour describes technology as society made durable. As well, LaTanya Sweeney talks about technology is policy. So, and one of the ways in which we're seeing this innovation run ahead of policy is innovation around AI is now so far ahead of our legal regimes that lawyers are asking, well, can I sue ChatGPT for defamation? And artists are asking, well, can I sue DALL-E for using my likeness or images that I've created, my photography, in the generation of new works? And those questions haven't been settled by our institutions. And one of the things that I wrote this paper a few years ago with Britt Paris, who's at Rutgers, called Cheap Fakes and Deep Fakes. And we're really pondering the question of, well, where have we been before with technology where we needed to sort out what we were seeing? And it brought us to the history of X-ray. So an X-ray is something that we've all had, and it seems very normal for us. But there was a time in the 1890s when X-rays were something that you would bring an X-ray to court and say, I got injured on the job, or this person broke my arm. And the judge would say, well, prove to me that this is a picture of the inside of your body. How do I know that this isn't something you just made up? And doctors would travel from place to place carrying X-ray machines and taking people's X-rays. And then they became the experts inside legal courtrooms who would say, yes, this is my X-ray, I took it, I can validate that at this time, this person's hand looked this way, and this isn't an artifact of the technology, it's really a broken bone, right? And it took years of experts moving into and through our institutions, medicine and science, incorporating and improving the technology through university research as a way for the X-ray to become something that is of the level of evidence. We saw very similar things play out in our society in the past around DNA. DNA is somewhat invisible to the naked eye, but nevertheless can prove you were at a crime doing bad things, right? If you get caught, which don't leave your DNA hanging around. That just makes sense, doesn't it? But nevertheless, criminals in the 50s didn't have to worry about that, What a time to be alive. Come on, guys. It's Tuesday night. Loosen up a bit. Chi-town. We're all going to go out and listen to some jazz later, right? So I want to ask about this sort of moments of experts and institutions, and what kind of social work do you think is going to need to get done in order to make these technologies comprehensible to society? Ian, I'll go to you first.
I don't know if it's possible. I don't know if it's possible. And one of the things when you were speaking, I was thinking about is like, well, in some ways that matter has been settled, and we decided that the availability of regulatory arbitrage was sort of something like a God-given right for commercial entrepreneurship in the late 20th and early 21st century. That is to say that the market should be able, we sort of decided this without deciding it, without ever debating it, the market should be able to exploit ambiguities in the legal code in order to produce wealth, power, and benefit, private benefit. Right, so like the way that Uber or Airbnb were able to rise to power, even the way that that Facebook and Google did so, like that sort of feels like it's been naturalized, in a sense. Like we don't now you have to somehow unwind all that stuff. So even this question of like legibility or like responsible, I always find this like so fascinating, right? Because like when you hire like a contractor to come work on your house or your office building or something, you don't like find the building construction company that does responsible building construction. You're like, you better be building the code and stuff, right? To be licensed as an architect or as a civil engineer, you have made a commitment inside the code of your profession and in your training that you're not going to build stuff that falls down. And if you are, we know how to hold you responsible. And so what we did is we unwound all that over the last 25 years, and we decided actually you don't really have to be responsible. You're just kind of taking advantage of the opportunities that were available to you, and so now we're trying to kind of climb back up that mountain. And when I look at the problem that way, it feels almost impossible. Because how do we recover a past that we've abandoned in terms of the values and the social, legal, political structures that would underwrite it? It's not. We can't just do it. By magic. Yeah.
I mean, it reminds me a lot of Donald Mackenzie's work in Inventing Accuracy, where he researched after, we knew what a nuclear bomb could do, we still needed to govern nuclear technologies. And so within the bureaucracy and in the field of nuclear research, people, in order to make themselves seem relevant, kept trying to make the bomb more accurate, as if it needed to be more accurate, right? Because the difference of a few centimeters with a nuclear weapon is not going to matter. But nevertheless, the bureaucracy carried on building gyroscopes and whatnot. And he asks in the epilogue, can we uninvent the bomb?
Although at least we don't explode a lot of nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
Whereas we use these technologies.
Well, one of the most recent bipartisan bills that have been floated, though, is to at least make mandatory a human in the loop for the nuclear launch codes. So at least they're not going to allow that to be pre-programmed and ready to go, which begs another question about networking and technologies and how much networking is actually good for us as a society. And is it the case that we are meant to be this tied into one another in these technological loops, which I don't know, it's more of a meta question on technology and philosophy. But Chenhao, I'd love to get your ideas of what needs to get done in order to take a step in the right direction from your perspective as a practitioner and a researcher, are there other ways that different fields should be getting involved in this work? And if so, what do you find promising in terms of partnerships?
Yeah, I guess I'll start by saying that I agree with Ian. I think what's very clear is that the world will be different, or AI will lead to a lot of substantial changes. Whether it's good or bad, I guess that's something we can figure out. And I think first off, I think it's very important. I think it's nice that we're having events like this, and I think at least right now it's very clear the general public is very interested in AI, wants to know more about AI, and I think that's an important and positive step. I'm not sure whether that will lead to a state where we reverse or we actually be able to regulate AI responsibly, but that's better than everyone doesn't know about AI and doesn't pay attention to this space and just let it go. And on top of that, I think it's useful to realize it's not something that's just up to computer scientists or the big corporation, and every sector should have a say in this process. And building on educating ourselves on this, and we can have more and more discussions, more than this one, even more formal ones, for instance, similar to the Congress hearing that we had today, so that we can make progress. And again, in the end, I think, as you were saying, it took a while for X-ray or DNA to be viewed as legal evidence, and I think similarly, regulation will be very much behind. And the hope is that it's not so behind that it leads to irreversible damages in humanity. But I guess personally, I'm relatively optimistic. I don't know. I think it will be very behind, and there will be some harm done. But hopefully, eventually we'll catch up and figure out what's the right mechanism to, I guess, use this as some kind of positive change.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the harms, and we're going to go to questions in about 3 minutes. So I don't know where the microphone is going to be, over that way. And students get first crack at it, all right? I'm watching you. So I wanted to ask you, Elizabeth, about the harms. One of the things that I've argued about AI and social media is that the abuse of this technology can have many different outcomes. So obviously some of the outcomes or some of the reasons why people might adopt or use these technologies, as we talked with Ian about play, we've talked a little bit about politics, profit, obviously. We're living through what I would consider an AI gold rush, in the sense that there is a lot of fool's gold out there, and we don't actually know the value of our data or the price of our privacy. So if we're thinking about play, politics, profit, a lot of the hype cycle around AI has also been about panic. It's about this idea that there will be a video so horrible, so striking that society goes into a frenzy, and we see things like events like January 6th happen again, that it triggers some kind of panic. Although I know that years and years and years of organizing with racial justice movements, we've seen horrible videos. We've seen some of the worst things, atrocities broadcast, and it didn't have that particular kind of outcome. And then the last effect I'll talk about is specifically around this notion of deepfakes, where there was a survey about 3 years ago of all of the deepfakes available online, and 95% of them were pornography. They were being used not just to imitate celebrities in untoward situations, but also being used in what might be called revenge porn type of situations. And so this technology has the capacity to create not just collective, but also individual harms. And I'd love for you to think about with us a little bit about responsible AI and how do they address harms in your field.
Yeah, so that's a really good thought around that. Let me see if I can't kind of back that up a little bit. Because when I think about it, I think about humans in the loop. We talked about that, right? But we also have to think about humans in the loop in terms of research that I've done on captology, computers as persuasive technology. So it's the humans that are consuming tons of information based on sources that you choose, whatever your feed is, whatever news source you want, whatever social media platform. And then you take that information and it informs your decisions about something. It informs your decisions about a group. It creates narratives about certain people. And in my line of work, then those people come to their jobs, and then that's how they influence the technology that they're developing or they're designing. So it starts with this information that they fed themselves about a certain group of people. Should they have a voice? Should they not have a voice? With responsible AI and the tenets of that, there are still some challenges with the humans in the loop bringing our own biases to the table in how we think about designing the technology and how we influence the technology. But in responsible AI, it does allow for what I call broader stakeholder engagement. I don't like to use the term diversity and inclusion because it has so many connotations about it, and it tends to be like an HR function. This is really about broadening who is a part of the AI lifecycle, even your third-party vendors. What are their processes around responsible AI, the data that you might consume or procure, who's annotating the data. So I tend to think about it, and in my research, because it's qualitative, I really want to understand the lived experiences of those who are consuming the information, how you're consuming it, how you are taking it back into the business practice, how you're taking it back into academia, and then how does that information make its way back out, and how are we using AI to multiply our own thought process and narratives. So responsible AI will take care of some of that, but we have to do a lot of that work ourselves. We have to educate ourselves, and we have to continue to, as I mentioned before, invest in attending things like this so that we understand what biases that we bring to the table and how that might cause second and third order harm to someone that we may have never met or may not ever meet.
Yeah, some of the things that my research has uncovered is looking at news and conspiracy theories, and some of the research that we've done, as well as Kelly Wheel, who wrote a book about flat earthers, is she describes in an interview a person who had been very interested in other conspiracy theories, but he had never thought about the earth being flat. And he said, well, that one found me. And I think in some instances, news also finds you while you're participating in some of these activities of just scrolling through your feed, or you're interested in, someone said that this thing had happened and you want to search for it. And I truly do believe that you're most susceptible to misinformation when you know what you don't know. That is when you're asking questions. And so one of the things that we want to be sure of when we allow for these large language models to interact with people is that what the information that people are getting is true and correct. Because part of your own right to freedom of expression isn't just about your right to speak. You have the right to seek and receive information. And when that is corrupted by algorithms or mislabeled data, or even data that has been poisoned, we're all worse off for it. And it actually does, in some ways, impact your right. So let's go to Q&A. There's nobody You're up there. All right, bring it on. Marco.
Hello. So my question is, we talked a little bit about how a lot of companies seemed a bit afraid, and they actually went to advocate for regulation. Moving forward, we've seen companies like OpenAI put their own regulations on ChatGPT from preventing it from doing certain things. In the future, do you think you'll see these limitations taking place in the form of ethical limitations in case AI isn't allowed to do certain things, or technical limitations where it is physically incapable of doing certain things? Or do you think that limitations will take a completely different form as AI progresses forward?
Who'd like to take that?
I just want to state something about OpenAI. It's not necessarily an answer to your question, so I'm conflicted by it. I love it. I use it every day for something. But I also think about when the CEO stands there and says we need regulation, then what happened to the ethical practices inside the organization when they hired a company that was using Kenyan workers, paying them $2 an hour to take all of this, moderate all of this content so that we, thousands of miles away, could enjoy this particular service. Those workers are now unionizing. So that to me is where I find this curious conversation about regulate us, because that certainly could have been something that they've done themselves. So that's all I wanted to say about that. And so hopefully someone else will add a little bit more to your question.
We also get a tech person to shut that light off if we're going to be looking at these beautiful students. It's like Migraine City over here. Very bright, very bright. I feel like Gizmo and the Gremlins. Ian, did you want to talk about this as well, the role that ethics might play and what has failed us?
Well, the question is really about like where are the controls gonna take?
Yeah, I was curious as we're moving forward, where do you think the controls will form? If these people are asking for regulation, where do they think the regulation's gonna come in the form of? Like, is it like you're just told you're not allowed to do something and then we just have to expect them, or is it coming in a different form?
I mean, it's definitely a leading question. It's the short answer I would give. Regulate me in a way that is compatible with my interests. Now, how will the regulators respond? Well, recent history suggests they will not. So that's one outcome. But there are maybe responses that, because there's a little bit of discourse today. By the way, I just want to say, I was reading like, oh, this is a historic thing for a tech company to ask. It's not. It's absolutely not a historic thing. It's weird that people are saying that. Because it is that sort of challenge of it's up to you. If you want to control, you do it. You take responsibility, so I don't have to. That's your job as the government. But this sort of sense of that we've entered some new era and we should have learned a lesson from the social media age where we didn't do any regulatory work, and now we're going to learn that lesson. That suggests that there's this sort of shift, this change of the guards. And it's not too late to go back on some of the bets we made with ourselves without knowing we were making them from that previous era that might be beneficial. So, and this is like, it's too complicated to talk about in a quick response, but the key word I've been using is downscaling. Like, we should maybe not be able to talk this much with one another. And no matter what that technology underlying that provision is, whether it's something like Facebook or Instagram, or whether it's something like ChatGPT or other similar technologies, if you reduce the amount of throughput that we give to one another that we can see, a very unpopular idea, by the way, completely acclimated to this, then that might work, right? So yeah, I think that if we ended up with creative, thoughtful, novel, and antagonistic approaches from the regulators to the technology companies, then that would be sort of the mindset to take, and then hopefully what would spill out of it, in answer to your question, would be something that would be like structurally beneficial for the social fabric, rather than it would look a particular way, because I don't know exactly how that might work.
Thank you.
Very good. Let's get another question up.
Hello, my name is Graham. I'm a second-year MPP student. So the licensing and anti-discrimination and building codes bill text already exists in the ADPPA, the American Data Privacy and Protection Act. It passed out of the Energy and Commerce Committee 53-2 last Congress. Can you talk about what your thoughts on that bill are? If it appears to have large bipartisan support, it would do a lot of what you're saying and even what they're talking about in these hearings. Can you talk about, are you familiar with any opposition? And, would you recommend that or something similar?
Does anybody want to tackle a policy question? More in-depthly policy?
I mean, we don't have any policy people really,
I mean, I technically work at the campus.
It's like, yeah, maybe you should answer.
I mean,
I guess you all said you'd like building codes. There is a bill with building codes. Do you have any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I just don't think that you're going to get anything through Congress at this stage when you look at the level of lobbying going on inside of Congress with these companies at the helm. So some of the research that I've done on the way in which Facebook tried to demonize TikTok was that Facebook hired a PR firm to leverage our local media ecosystem in order to say that TikTok was the genesis of this slap a teacher challenge. It actually had originated on Facebook. And the vulnerability on our local news systems is essentially what Facebook was able to exploit by hiring this PR firm. And so it acts like the Restrict Act, or some things where we would limit TikTok and not other companies. I just don't think you're going to get to the end of the policy pipeline without a real dogfight when it comes to confronting these companies for their practices and their real politic. It's no surprise that at the helm of many of the comms folks at these big tech companies are former politicians themselves, right? And so we have to think about the relationship not just of bureaucrats qua bureaucrats, but bureaucrats that have a corporate interest in doing nothing, right? And that's where we've had to overcome tobacco. We've had to overcome big pharma. We've had to overcome oil industries. And that's not easy to do without a concerted idea about not just what policies need to be regulated, but also what needs to happen in practice. And I think that that's not something that our government is equipped to do, but other countries seem to be moving faster, for instance, the DSA. What's interesting about technology is that when you do have these global products, though, sometimes regulation in one country can infect the entire product and change the entire scope of things. But what we do know is when technology companies are so big and so rich and so powerful, they just choose to pay the fine rather than change the technology, which is why, you might even advocate for some criminal codes to be adopted around the misuse and misappropriation of privacy and data. So unfortunately, I feel like bills often die in the pipeline because of the effect of lobbying in DC. Next question.
Hi, my name is Kelly Wagman, and I'm a PhD student in computer science with a background in media studies. And I was particularly curious to hear more about the disinformation aspect of AI, because I think that seems like one of the big harms. I know, Joan, you have a history of research in that area, and I was kind of curious as we've moved from, old disinformation practices to the internet and social media to now LLMs that will spew this at much greater scale. What are the socio-technical approaches to managing that, or kind of where are we going with that?
Yeah, there's a lot to discuss related to large language models and disinformation because there is no fidelity to the truth in any of these apparatuses or in any of these technological designs. And I don't fault the technology for not knowing what's true and false. Truth is a human process. It's something that we struggle over. It's something we debate. It's something we deeply research. And knowledge is incredibly expensive to produce. I know this because I run a research lab that spends $3 million a year trying to get at the truth of some really bizarre things. But there are things that are playing out over our social media and information platforms. The thing about large language models that I'm most concerned with isn't just that there would be bespoke, personalized disinformation appearing in the replies of every politician on every platform, because that already happens. Uncle Larry's already there telling you, that Maxine Waters isn't up to snuff. And so I'm not exactly afraid of that, but what I am afraid of is the things we know we don't know, which is what these things are going to do in the wild. So you can imagine an ambitious campaigner that says, you know what, we don't have enough volunteers to cover this area. We're going to move to a relational organizing model where we text message our constituents, and we're going to apply a large language model, ChatGPT, to answer people's questions, different from a FAQ where it would be triggered by certain keywords, but it would be personalized and people would think that they're interacting with a campaign person. And then all you would have to do is poison that data to say negative things about your opponent, and we're off to the races, right? And we don't know what everybody's seeing. And this was very consequential in 2016, where we didn't know who was using advertising technology and for what purpose at Facebook. And then we later uncovered that there was a multi-million-dollar operation, or I don't know the exact figure, but there were millions of people, 127 million people reached by Russian propaganda in the 2016 election. And they did some of that was targeted at black populations. There's a great Channel 4 documentary about that. But all I'm trying to say is that we don't know exactly how these components are going to be plugged together and set out. And I really wonder at this stage if the technology is deployable at different levels, and part of the technology is being made by these big companies that are invested in the production of it. Where is the bottom line that requires them to also make the antidote, right? That requires them to make sure that we know what is what and if you're talking to a human being or not. But unfortunately, some of the most innovative uses of technology have come from marketers turned political operators, and I don't trust them. And so I think that we're going to see a lot of deceptive campaign organizing with these new technologies. I don't know. Prove me wrong, Ian. You're on board with it?
I mean, no, the marketers are always ahead of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, marketers taught me a lot of what I know about tracking down disinformation and how to use AdWords and different kinds of keyword configurations to make your, it was like the #1 response the day that Martha Stewart got arrested, when you searched for Martha Stewart, was a Samsung cell phone. And that's because this person knew that Martha Stewart was about to be arrested. He bought all the keywords for it. And that morning, it takes about 48 hours for Google AdWords to figure out that you're hoaxing the system. And he was in, right? And so marketers are tricky. Yeah. We've got time for, let's take 2 more questions, and then we'll do a round of wrap-up.
Hi, I'm Nick, third-year physics and philosophy student at the college, and I'm very intrigued by what you said about truth and knowledge regarding the use of AI, especially in the age of ChatGPT. And we were mentioning about how the mechanism is working, right? We train it with all of the internet, and then it predicts with a certain probability what the next word is going to be. And you enter a prompt, it gives you that kind of prediction. And this idea of plagiarism or not, that this debate is kind of reminiscent of another kind of technological product, which is the Library of Babel, which exists on the internet based on 1 million characters and all its combinations. So everything that we say and write, or anything that the ChatGPT can produce, is already there. And I'm just wondering, obviously, in terms of ChatGPT, we are focusing on much smaller subspace of the possible words and language that we can produce, and training our machine with that. But in what sense are we qualitatively different in terms of when we ask the question, is this piece of knowledge really plagiarized and owned by someone before it is produced in this fashion? In the 2 situations, can we frame the question differently, or is there something that I'm missing over here?
Interesting. Let's take our last question, and then I'll let you guys answer.
There's this sense of kind of like there will be a fire alarm between now and when artificial general intelligence arrives that will kind of serve as a warning to humans and a catalyst and get them to kind of to get their act together before it's kind of too late. Do you guys think that ChatGPT is like this fire alarm? What can we learn from our response to these large language models? Did we respond appropriately? Did these large AI companies respond appropriately? Are they responding appropriately when there's this kind of like AI arms race that's happening? So yeah, what can we learn from our response, and how can we get ourselves on the right trajectory if we're not?
So we'll go right down the line. Chenhao, you can go first, and you can pick either question or sum up some of your main points.
Yeah, I guess maybe I'll take the second question. Or like, I guess, yeah, I think ChatGPT is certainly not AGI in my opinion. Or like in general, I think the notion of like artificial general intelligence is yield-defined. I'm not sure that's the most worrisome thing. And similar to Joan's question about disinformation, I think Joan's worry seems to be much more legitimate compared to kind of the typical concerns that AI can now create a lot of misinformation. I think the marketers like using these tools and driving misinformation campaigns or disinformation campaigns is much more worrisome. And I guess I kind of have been trying to be a little more positive on this thing in general. I guess I think there is also recent line work on this notion of human AI co-reasoning, and one kind of cute result is that if you can use AI to kind of frame explanation as questions, which becomes more effective than just give those as statements. You can, like, given a, say, misinformation, disinformation campaign, and maybe AI can help you ask related questions and question the train of argument. These tools are not going to be as attractive as marketer campaigns. So I'm not entirely sure this will actually be more effective to counteract against the market's tricky campaigns. But I do think there's like a lot of wide possibility about how we can use these tools and what they may look like in the future. And I think that might be where like regulatory, I guess, policies can come in and guide these uses so that it does more good. And I use the final second to kind of, like, there's actually a conference called Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency on this topic, happening in Chicago in a month, and I'm helping organize that, and it would be great if you check it out. There will be a lot more conversation on this for 4 straight days.
FACCT online.
Yes, FACCT. If you search it, Fact 2023. Anyway, literally I was talking about updating the website right before this. So, yeah.
Excellent. Ian?
The common thread between both questions to me is the idea that we invent, both with deliberateness and accident, the concepts that we use and that then use us. And so whether that's the question of plagiarism or what it counts to be original, and what kind of material you use and what it means that you use it, or what a threat even is. I agree that AJ is a completely useless term that mostly just kind of feeds the egos of the technologists who think that they're going to end the world. So that's sort of the common thread, I would say. And the more that we can control our knowledge about that knowledge, then the better off we will be in posing and answering questions about what to do about it.
And I think I'll take the second question and just say I need to reflect on that a little more, because when you talk about a fire alarm, I know I've been in this space for about 7 years. And there were fire alarms then, or people trying to raise alarms about facial recognition technology or exam proctoring or algorithms that were determining healthcare outcomes or mortgage rates. So there's been a lot of alarms along the way. And now I don't know why I'm still trying to understand what it is about ChatGPT that is alarming more people now than a few years ago, when some of these technologies were in the marketplace that were really causing harm to vulnerable populations and communities of color. And so I like to see it, but at the same time, I know that, like I said, I've been in this space for a minute. And so I don't know. I don't know why it's the alarm now. But I do know that more organizations are creating a different set of responsible AI or AI ethics policies around it than they did with the other AI-enabled technologies that they were selling or procuring. So it's just real curious line of thinking for me. And thank you for both of your questions.
All right. So we're going to wrap up. I want to give you 2 bits of homework. One is, if you feel like it, I got a new book out called Meme Wars, and it's about how the internet is changing our politics. It begins with Occupy, it ends with the insurrection. It's got a lot of nonsense in between. Those are the sort of bookend chapters. But better than my book, and a book that you will really stand to learn something from, is Virginia Eubanks's Automating Inequality, also AI, about the way in which that other set of alarm bells around algorithms and the unfair distribution of resources and information is impacting people's everyday experience of interacting with healthcare and interacting with education, interacting with need-based social safety net type of applications, all the way down to crime and sentencing. And so there's so much great research out there, and I think that it's up to us to stay educated, stay ahead of the game, and we got to fight the man now, right? We got to call these corporations to task, and we got to really bring the cloud back to earth and say, this is about our safety, it's about our humanity, and everyone then is implicated. And so I just want to say, thank you to the school, thank you to the IOP, thank you to the library for having us. I believe that libraries are some of the most important institutions. I hope we can get 100,000 librarians to fix the internet. That's my dream. So with that parting thought, thank you so much.